Hey guys, it's been a while since I've done a live. Welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the critical thinking true crime channel. Let me ask you guys a question. What do you understand about the term critical thinking? Do you think critical thinking means to be critical, to criticize? What do you think? What do you understand from the term critical thinking? So while you guys are answering that, I'm going to take you through what we're going to be doing in this live stream. We're going to be thinking about the whole Kiely Rodni case from the beginning till where we are now, but in terms of who was narrating it, who was setting the tone of the narrative. And I think it has changed over time. I think who was who was sort of shaping the narrative in the beginning and who's shaping it now is very, very different. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the effort to try and have or create or present a definitive narrative, right? You guys on the other side of the screen, the audience, you may not be aware of it, but there is a strong desire. If you're a creator, if you're a writer, if you're a journalist, you want to be the definitive source. You want to be the best source. You want to be the most credible source. You want your story to be the definitive story. So a good example is, who provided definitive coverage of the Gabby Petito case, right? Brian Enton. That's who you want to be. If you someone who is covering true crime, you are aspiring to reach that level of credibility and kind of coverage, right? And so the same question sort of applies here. If Brian Enton was the definitive voice in the Gabby Petito case, who is the definitive voice in the Kiely Rodni case? Timmy, do you want to have your Madonna and child moment? Let's have a look at who's here. Alyssa Nowak, hi from Illinois. Good to see you. Thanks, mods, for being here. Sharon Drury says, love the background scene. He's pretty cool, hey? Sylvia Roger says, it's logic and evidence-based. Laugh at Life says, finally alive, I'm not sleeping. Laurie Kobeck, good to see you. So that is basically the right answer. Thinking critically is being objective, right? It's trying to be objective. So let's bring that up. And sometimes we're missing a piece of a puzzle and we need to be objective about that piece that we don't have. Are we seeing what we want to see? Are we seeing evidence, or are we imagining evidence that's not there, right? So let me bring up this slide or this image. What are some of the characteristics or skills of critical thinkers, right? Now, the reason I'm starting this live this way is just to make you think about thinking, right? I want you to think about thinking. So in other words, you sort of step outside of yourself, step outside of this whole conversation, and try and think about it objectively, not subjectively, which is what a lot of the coverage of this case has been, objectively, right? So when you think about thinking, you're starting to think in an objective way. You're stepping outside of that subjectivity, right? And now we're gonna come back to who have been the definitive narrators. We're gonna come back to that. But I first want to address this question. First of all, what is critical thinking? How do you think critically? And then we want to start kind of applying it to some of the narrators in this case. Have they been thinking critically? If so, great. If not, why not? Are we holding them to a standard of critical analysis, right? So what does it mean to think critically? According to this particular perspective, critical thinking is among the first causes for change. Okay, so that's in terms of school, right? for no other reason than it conditions the mind to suspect the form and function of everything it sees, right? That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about just these basic things, right? Critical thinking means you question, you analyze, you evaluate, you clarify certain things in a kind of a continuous cycle, right? And that part's also quite important. You actually create um, hypotheses, you create ideas, you create possible solutions. So it's not just that if you think about the word analyze, analyzing is always breaking down information. Well, at the end of this whole process, you've also got to synthesize something. You've got to come up with an idea. You've got to come up with some kind of scenario, right? But I want you to be honest and ask yourself, how often do you explore these areas of thinking? Do you try and clarify things? Do you question things? Do you, I think in terms of identify, it is a couple of different things. One of them is, for example, in true crime, you would want to identify evidence. You would want to say, that's evidence that is, what's the word? That doesn't meet the standard for evidence. Another thing is, can you identify a legitimate suspect? Has a suspect been identified? Do you see where I'm coming from? Does someone have an identity, an alibi? Yes or no? For me, I think a big part of true crime is analysis, but it's also evaluating that analysis, being able to look at information and evaluate it. So one of the things I do want to get to at the end of the whole narrative thing is, how did I come up with this thing? People are like, how do you know that the toxicology has been is completed, right? And that is based on 2 or 3 assumptions, but those assumptions are grounded in things that we absolutely know, things that law enforcement have said as well, right? So I want to come back to that, and then but I think for starters, I just want to go to the definition of critical thinking. Critical thinking is the objective analysis, right? Objective analysis and evaluation of an issue to form a judgment, right? Now, I often hear in true crime, people will say, don't judge or something like that. Part of true crime is using your discernment to come to a particular decision. In other words, you've got to evaluate the information and you've got to be objective about it. And then you eventually form some kind of assessment on that. That's often where people get it wrong. They get the information, but they don't know how to assess it, right? And that separates the good critical thinkers from the not so good ones. So coming to the subject matter of this particular episode, who is dictating the narrative in this particular case, right? Who is dictating the narrative in the Kiely Rodni case? What do you guys think is the answer to that? Who is dictating the narrative? Now, I just want to go through some of your votes. So far, I think about 2/3 of you say no one. Everyone's just speculating. So it's kind of a free, level playing field. No one's dominating the conversation. Everyone's just speculating. And most of you are saying that. I must say, I totally disagree with that. I don't think everyone's just speculating. In terms of law enforcement dictating the narrative, I think law enforcement, if you remember right in the beginning, there were daily press conferences and we got all our information from law enforcement. They would tell us that they found a burial site, but that it was for a dog. We found out how many search teams were doing whatever. And so we certainly got our our information, a lot of our information from law enforcement. But that has faded into the background. We haven't heard from law enforcement for quite a long time, and when we do, it's infrequent. So I definitely wouldn't say that law enforcement are dictating the narrative. I think it's an open question to say, should they be? Should they be the full and final source for all information? And I would sort of argue that maybe they should be more involved in social media. For example, it would be nice to know whether they've found Kiely's phone or not. On the other hand, that kind of information can be very sensitive. We didn't know that information, for example, in the Chris Watts case. It's quite weird. 13% say law enforcement, 13% say mainstream media. I really don't know how you can say mainstream media is dictating the narrative. Like, dictating means pushing it in a particular direction. I've noticed mainstream media has been sort of playing catch up to social media. So when Checker TV found the laptop, mainstream media only reported on it about 2 or 3 days later. There's an article that's just come out now about the date, the exact date that Kiely died is missing from the celebration flyer. Social media has been speculating about that for days. I think it's the first time that I've seen that in mainstream media. It's definitely not being dictated by mainstream media. And then the fourth option is one channel. Is one channel dictating the narrative? So it's quite interesting how that's the smallest amount. So at the moment, 12% are saying one channel have actually had any impact on the Kiely Rodni case. And most of you are saying it's actually everyone is just speculating and no one has actually had any impact on what people think about it. Quite interesting. Do you guys agree with that? Do you think it's true that no one has actually really influenced the Kiely Rodni case? So if you're a true crime writer, right, and I am, if you're covering true crime, you really want to be seen as credible. You want to have the definitive story in a particular case. Let me bring that back up. Right? You want to be seen as credible. You try to be as credible as you can be as well. You try to be accurate. You want to end up with a definitive story in a particular case. So far, I haven't actually introduced myself to a lot of the new subscribers. I haven't told you my name. I haven't told you anything really about me. I haven't really told you about my background, my education, and I'm not going to do that here. I might do that in a follow-up episode, maybe the next one or the one after. What I want to do now is just think generally about a high-profile case that true crime happens to be invested in right now, right? And it is this case. It's about this 16-year-old. We want to know what happened to her. We want to know some of the things that we don't know. One of the ways you know better, or you're in a better position to know what has happened, is when you take the trouble to get to know the people in these cases, not the people who are talking about it or the people who are investigating it, but the people who are at the very center, at the epicenter, right? And so you want to spend a little bit of time looking at this person and getting a sense of who she is, not what somebody else says she is, or even what her mother or a friend or a boyfriend says. Who does she say she is? How does she present herself? How does she kind of self-identify? How much time have you spent thinking about that? thinking about who was Kiely Rodni? What was going on in her life at the time? What is the context that was taking place? Or is that completely irrelevant? I can tell you, if you know true crime well, it's never irrelevant. The identity of a person is one of the most important dynamics you can kind of go into. It starts to set up all the connections you're going to make. So again, who's defining the narrative of Kiely Rodni right now? And do you think that they know who Kiely is? Do you think that they've spent enough time getting a sense of who this 16-year-old was, right? Now, let me say again, what do you think it means to have a definitive narrative, and does it matter? Now, in the 1996 Everest tragedy, I don't know if you guys know about that. That happened, I think, 26 years ago now. Yes, last year was the 25-year anniversary. I think it's easy to say who wrote the definitive narrative in the 96 Everest disaster. It was John Krakauer. If you know about the Everest disaster and you know who John Krakauer is, I don't need to make the point any better. If you don't know, John Krakauer is basically the guy who wrote a book that got about 2,000 reviews when I last looked. He sold a ton of books. He also sold the movie and television rights. And I've got to say, that's one of the best books I've ever read, right? He managed to write the definitive narrative. And what was quite interesting was, even though it was definitive, it had some problems. There were a couple of small questions about objectivity, because he was one of the people, one of the expedition members, right? So I actually try to achieve the same thing, the trying to get a definitive narrative in true crime with my coverage of the Chris Watts case. It was a lot more difficult than I expected, because Watts changed his version several times. And of course, there were several people who also wrote books, including one author who wrote a first-hand account. Now, I've got to say, whenever you get a first-hand account, whenever you have someone who has first-hand contact with the people at the center, that's very hard to beat. It's very hard to come in indirectly. So John Krakauer climbed Everest. He was in the middle of all of that when it played out. So in the Kiely Rodni case, I think you've also got to ask, who has got first-hand knowledge of this case? And I think the answer is certainly law enforcement do, right? Law enforcement are right there. Of course, feels like they dropped the ball to some extent with the discovery of the vehicle and the recovery of the vehicle. But in terms of other things, they must have spoken to a lot of the kids at the party. They had boots on the ground, all that kind of thing. Then there are also other people who have first-hand knowledge, such as Sammy and Jagger and Mags and those people. They also, to some extent, their knowledge can trump what law enforcement knows, right? And so on and so on. Family members, you can have the same thing. Do you think a YouTuber can come along and sort of figure it all out, like figure out what is going on? For example, at a party where there were 300 people, and develop that first-hand insight. Do you think that's easy to do? So have a look at some of your comments. That's true. Yeah, it is a really good read. It is a really good read. But there are quite a few books about it as well. So when I tried to write or come up with a definitive story in the Chris Watts case, I wrote a blog that I updated daily, often multiple times daily. And this was before I started putting content on YouTube. And I think you'll agree that between those who know me and those who read the books, between the 9 Two-Face books and the Silver Fox trilogy, if my work wasn't definitive, it was quite close, right? Here's the definition for definitive. It's a conclusive, final, ultimate, decisive um, uh, conclusion. It's a decision that's reached with authority, right? So when we're talking about dictating, it's kind of not only saying, guys, this is the definitive account, but I'm also going to dictate that account. I'm going to tell you that this is definitive, right? Do you get what I'm saying? It's one thing to try to be definitive and hope that people think it's definitive. It's another thing to say, I'm going to dictate, I'm going to tell you that this is definitive. I'm going to, do you get what I'm saying? Something that's definitive often comes about by itself. People decide this is really insightful, this is really intelligent, and then they decide to support it. But you can also try and dictate, and that's a totally different situation. And so I think if you've got your, and I'm going to put my thinking cap on, right? If you've got your thinking cap on, your critical thinking cap, I think you must ask two questions. In the Kiely Rodni case, who is piecing together the definitive narrative, right? That's the first question. And then the other question is someone dictating a narrative? Just a kind of an open question. Sue, good to see you here. I only watch this channel on the Kiely case. Hazel says, I get what you're saying. That's great. That's great. So now I'm gonna just sort of what's the word? I'm going to follow on. I'm going to follow on from that. So think about, again, just think objectively. Don't think through a subjective lens. Think of from the outside. In the Kiely Rodni case, who would you say is defining, setting the tone, shaping the narrative in this case? Now, I would, if I can give my opinion, I think there was a YouTuber in the Netherlands who was basically everything that there was to cover. She seemed to be covering it first. She seemed to be covering it left, right, and center. Like, in other words, she was doing a really good job at being the first best source, right? And you could, in a way, say that she was providing definitive coverage. I think that would be a fair statement to make. But look where we are now. Would you say that that's still the case? Would you say that she's still definitively providing the definitive coverage? Well, she can't be if she's no longer covering it, right? Maybe you could argue with that and say, yeah, but she doesn't have to. It was definitive. That's also an argument. All I'm saying is there was sort of up to the minute, constant information that's not really happening at the moment. So has the definitive narrative shifted from one source to another, right? In terms of true crime, so now I want you to think about this in a very global way. So this is really addressed to people who are part of this channel, that have been part of this channel for some time, but also if you've been following true crime in general for a while. The Watts case, the Petito case, the Laurie Vello case, the Caitlin Armstrong case, the Suzanne Morphew case, all of those cases. If you think about those cases and you think about this case, what's kind of different about this case? Think about the cast of creators that were present with Chris Watts, that were present with, not everyone covered Caitlin Armstrong, but certainly Gabby Petito and Chris Watts, you had kind of an overlap. So you had kind of the same cast of creators, same old, same old. You have the same old cast in terms of this case. If not, who are sort of the new kids on the block? Who are the new true crime kind of aficionados, right? So let me ask again, would you say the narrative is being shaped, influenced, or is it something stronger? Is it being dictated? Is it actually kind of a tyranny that's taking place? You know, someone kind of completely pushing the whole narrative in one direction, right? It's a question. Maybe you'd say, and I think most of you are saying, no, everyone's just speculating. It's just completely organic. Everyone is just speculating. It is quite interesting that on the poll, 63% says everyone's just speculating, no one's dictating anything, and the least amount of votes is that one channel has done really anything special. Quite interesting. So there hasn't been one channel that has really come in and sort of, what's the word, change people's minds. So I did a Google search today, and this is what came up. So I just did a random Google search, Kiely Rodni. You guys can do the same thing. I mean, maybe my Google is corrupt, or maybe my Google is, you know, some sort of algorithm that is weird or wacko. Maybe your algorithm is different. But when I did this Google search today, this is what it came up with. It said, Kiely Rodni, top stories, News Nation. Diver suspects foul play. That's the first one. That was 2 days ago. Funny, it's above your tango. Obviously, it gives more credibility to News Nation. Then the next one, diver who found Kiely Rodni suspects foul play. It's basically the identical assessment. So both stories, although they're different from different sources, they're dealing with the same source of information, right? And then there's another one from Celeb Magazine, which is kind of different, talking about it could delay autopsy results. And I kind of touched on that a little bit in my previous live. I do want to talk a little bit about normal turnaround times for toxicology. I put a few slides in the live, but I get the feeling people simply didn't watch it, so they don't know how I inferred that the toxicology is actually already ready. We know the autopsy is. But if you look at the search results, right? So in other words, if you Google Kiely Rodni, I don't think you can say that mainstream media is dictating the narrative. The narrative that they are, what's the word, repeating is a narrative that they're getting somewhere else, where they're getting it from. So in terms of these two top stories, it's referring to the same thing, right? Diver suspects foul play. Again, diver suspects foul play. Wouldn't you say that that's the dominant narrative in the story? A diver suspects foul play. That's what the mainstream media are just really repeating. That's what social media has been saying. That's the narrative. Is that the narrative of law enforcement? Foul play, do you think? Is that the narrative of Kylie's family? If it was, wouldn't you think that they would be looking for her murderer? So that's the search I did today. And now we're going to look at a search I did yesterday. Again, Kiely Rodni, top stories. Diver who found California teen says death reeks of foul play. That's from the Daily Mail. Fox News. Volunteer dive team founder remains suspects foul play. Same thing. News Nation. Diver suspects foul play in Kiely Rodni's disappearance. Right? So I'm really simplifying this, and it's kind of reductionist. But what I'm trying to say is, if you Google Kiely Rodni, you are kind of getting a very simplified, abbreviated, this is the narrative, or this is the introduction to the narrative in the Kiely Rodni case, right? And if you kind of think critically about it, then you kind of ask, if you think critically about that narrative and you say, is it a foul play thing? Is it suspicious? Are you allowed to question whether it is? Can you evaluate whether it is? For example, can you say, if someone floats to the back of the vehicle, is that definitively a sign of foul play? Can I kind of create some new and original thoughts, or must I stick to the script here? Can we clarify certain things? Can we question certain things? Can we do all these things, or can we not? Are we being kind of dictated to a certain kind of script? Do you get where I'm coming from? So what you're getting when you Google is basically a particular narrative. And I don't know about you guys, but don't you think that right now that's the definitive narrative? Wouldn't you say that right now the definitive narrative is that there's foul play in the Kiely Rodni case? That's the definitive, conclusive, I wouldn't say final narrative, but almost final narrative. Do you guys agree with that? Just right now, where we are now, that it appears that just when you Google Kiely Rodni, it's that there's foul play. And then the next thing is, well, where did that foul play narrative come from? Well, in each case, they say, diver who found the volunteer dive team, diver suspects. Here again, diver suspects foul play, diver who found Kiely, and then that's actually something different. Do you guys see where I'm coming from? Does it make sense what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say the definitive narrative right now is the foul play narrative. And it's definitely not mainstream media saying, we are dictating to you that you must believe this. They're saying, this is what these people are saying who were there. This is what these people are saying who have done this before, and it's what they think and what they, based on their insight and their first-hand experience, it's based on what they saw and think and know, right? Yeah, Elena Zhu says AWPR trusted source. Yeah. So, but do you agree that this is a definitive narrative? It's foul play, right? Okay, so we've gotten that far. So what happened to Kiely reeks of foul play. It's suspicious. And the only one that's capable of knowing what really happened in this case is a world-class dive team. Do you guys agree with it? The only people who are capable of knowing what really happened here are a world-class dive team. Do you guys agree with that? Jennifer King says AWP is not law enforcement. Well, aren't they better than law enforcement? I mean, isn't that what they proved, that they found something that law enforcement couldn't? So doesn't what they've found kind of, isn't that better than law enforcement? Haven't they proved that? Okay. So isn't that precisely the case, that the only ones capable of knowing are the AWP divers? Because if you think about it, when Nick Rinn dived down, he was the first and really only one. I'm not quite sure if Doug dived down. it dove down. But we know for sure that when Nick dived down, he saw the vehicle kind of the way it was, right? I'm trying to say, when he dived down, everything he saw was sort of the way, the way that it was left is the way that he found it. So he had this first-hand encounter that in a way no one else had. You could say, yeah, but law enforcement divers arrived hours later, or whatever it is, they arrived later. But if you look at the footage, they are salvaging that vehicle like at dusk, the sun setting. It's very difficult to see in that kind of water when your light source is kind of gone. So when Nick Rinn dived down, it was sort of almost the middle of the day. So the lighting, even from above, would have been almost at maximum. Plus, he had very good light as well. I'm just saying, probably the person who saw the vehicle as it was the best was Nick Rinn, and then they had footage of it. I'm sure law enforcement arrived and maybe they took photos underwater as well, but probably late in the day, and probably they're sort of darker. We don't know for sure because we haven't seen it. But do you agree that pushes the whole thing, the whole first-hand thing, in a big way to AWP, right? The fact that only AWP divers saw what they saw when they found the vehicle. They know things no one else knows and things no one else can know, right? Let me put that up. Shane Clack says, that's it, they have it. Okay, a couple of people saying no. Okay. Pauline says, there's a dark side to heroism, isn't there? Or there can be. Frisco Chick says, yes, AWP knows the truth. Okay. So that is a big part of this whole idea of the definitive narrative. You sort of feel like the definitive narrative is the only comprehensively true narrative. All the others are sort of, it's either a little, like a smaller piece of it, or it's another view, but it's not quite right, right? So do you guys agree that AWP have influenced the mainstream media narrative? Do you guys agree with that? Do you guys agree that what they've seen and said and done has influenced the mainstream media narrative? I mean, I've just provided just 2 Google searches I've done in the past 2 days, and I think 5 of the 6 of the top Google searches reference AWP. So do you think it's fair to say that AWP have influenced the mainstream media narrative, right? So Elina says, totally agree. So I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think all the major and minor true crime channels on YouTube have played host to AWP, right? So if you think about that aspect, AWP have been in the mainstream media. If you think about other YouTube channels that have come up in the mainstream media narrative, I can't really think of any besides a quick little nod to Checker TV. Sort of, they found a laptop and then the thing kind of moved on. Not really a lot of coverage, some coverage, and to his credit. But I mean, it was quite strange. I saw an article in the New York Post. I think I saw an article in The Sun, I think. And Checker TV didn't want to say who he was, didn't want to say who his name was, which is a little bit, it's like PR, but I don't want to talk too much kind of thing. Well, I don't want to be too not forthcoming, but I don't want to be too make myself too familiar. Whereas AWP definitely not done that. You know what I mean? But can you think of another true crime channel that sort of been referenced in the mainstream media. Not necessarily a true crime channel, but a YouTube channel. Now, if you think about AWP, they've been on all the major and minor true crime channels on YouTube. All of these true crime channels have played host to AWP. All of these true crime channels have allowed AWP to air their suspicious narrative without challenge. I don't know if there was, anyone who said, but why? To sort of like, what do you think happened? And then they just said what they did. I think there was one channel that sort of did that, and that was quite a big channel, Law and Crime, basically did say something like, do you still think it's suspicious? That's the most challenging question I think I've seen them asked. And I thought that was quite interesting. Anyway, so if you think about it, AWP and most true crime creators have exchanged a lot of subscriber gold. Like if you think about it, like if AWP came onto your channel, you would get, I don't know, 5,000 subs in chat or 4,000. You would get minimum 20,000 views for that video. And there would be quite a lot of, you must support AWP, and they would say something nice about your channel as well. But there's quite a lot of kind of exchange of whatever, subscribers, support, all that kind of thing. I mean, it's par for the course. You guys know how YouTube works, right? So there's a lot of mutual endorsement and subscriber swaps and all that. And I'm sure both sides would agree that it's been a very good arrangement. It's kind of worked, right? So kind of like doing business both ways has definitely been good. Now, if you take that aspect, you might say, yeah, well, that's normal, that's totally fine. And you come back to this critical thinking thing, right? Now, just follow what I'm talking about. I'm saying, if you are in the true crime YouTube community and your job or your work is to earn a living on YouTube and to grow your channel, and a much bigger channel comes on and they have certain thoughts, are you going to think very critically about it, or are you going to really just be trying to make sure your channel goes with this flow, because it's a big torrent of support that's going on? Or are you going to mess with that and kind of clarify, like, really, do you think it's foul play, and what time did you call law enforcement? Are you going to like ask questions, or are you going to sort of what's the word, sort of facilitate just kind of an interview? Do you know what I mean? Julie says they've inserted themselves as witnesses by finding the car, but okay. So I would have liked to have seen more of that, is like asking questions. There was, I think I saw quite a bit of that on Duty Ron. I know they did ask certain questions. And one thing that was quite useful and quite clever was they actually asked Nick Rinn, do you have any questions? And he had a question about what does actually happen to a body post-mortem. And they actually had an expert there to say, this is what happens. And it's actually normal that a body would float. And I think his question was, is 75-degree water cold? And she said, absolutely not. That's warm water, right? And you kind of got the idea that he wasn't really aware of that. He wasn't really aware that in very cold water, bodies sink, and in warm water, bodies float, because the bacteria in those bodies germinate, propagate when it's warm enough, right? Then you've got to define what's warm. Well, summer, like California in summer, a reservoir in California in summer, 75 degrees, that's warm. Cold is when you're talking about winter and bodies of water freezing, right? So remember what you're talking about here. It's kind of just a very broad question. And the question is, who is defining the narrative in the Kiely Rodni case? Not just who is, who was. How has that definitive narrative changed hands? That's the one question. The other question is, has someone been dictating that narrative? Has it just come about by itself, or is someone dictating that narrative? So within the background to all of this, some channels have seen their subscriber base grow by about 25% or more of the past month. Now, you must bear in mind, some of these channels have been around for 4 years or 5 years, and they sort of get to a certain number, and it just stays there for months and months and months and months. And then in 2 weeks, it jumps up 25%, right? Now, again, you've got to ask yourself, if your channel is growing 25%, is your critical thinking going to take you one way or another way? Is it going to take you with your growth, or are you going to, maybe think in a different way? Charles Bell says, everyone is dictating their own narrative. No one knows the truth yet. Madeline says, I've been all over the place. A Voice for Hope says it started with someone and then someone else. Okay. Okay. So I think you've got to also bear that in mind. During the Kiely Rodni case, some channels have grown phenomenally. I think Adventures with Purpose have more than succeeded in terms of their own video. I think when I last looked at that, 2.2 million views. So if you think about which like single YouTube video has done by far the best, which single sort of video production covering the Kiely Rodni case has been the most popular, I guess. What do you think the answer is? I also think I would say they've succeeded in spreading the same message far beyond their own channel, right? Do you guys agree with that? Do you think it's fair to say that if there's any channel that has done really well at spreading their message beyond their own channel, it's them? Do you guys agree? Do you think that's fair to say? My channel actually did a count. We were just curious. We said, let's see how many, and it's like not these little channels, it's sort of the main guys, fairly established channels. How many are pushing the foul play narrative? And we counted 20. We counted 20 channels pushing the foul play narrative. So and they all like the biggest channels. It's like I'm not quite sure if you could say law and crime, except their headlines were like words like suspicious and foul play. So, and the headline of their videos is the same thing that AWP have been saying, right? So I'm going to just do that. Just put that one up. I can't find it now. Where is it? New comments. If you think about it, so if you think about like the bigger channels, AWP have got like almost 100% consensus. Like almost everybody agrees with them, right? That's actually an incredible achievement. It's incredible achievement that almost the whole true crime community basically said they're kind of looking on from the sidelines. They see Adventures with Purpose getting involved in the Kiely Rodni case, quite late, on like day 16, 15, 16. They come into the Kiely Rodni case, they almost magically find the vehicle, find her, and blow the whole thing completely open. It's like law enforcement seem to be caught off guard. And in a way, I think the true crime community also caught off guard. I mean, I don't know. I think I was one of those people who said, "Don't waste your time looking in Prosser Lake. You're not going to find anything, right?" And guess what? They did. Um, and so suddenly it's like, wow, reality shifts, right? And so virtually the whole true crime community basically says, "Cheapers, you guys are good." And okay, so looks like foul play. Yeah, it does look like foul play, right? I'm just saying it's incredible achievement that almost 100% of the true crime community sort of looked on from the outside in a way, saw what AWP said, and basically said, "Yeah, it actually does look like foul play," right? You know what I'm saying? It's that's quite a that shows like a really it shows that the true crime community consider them really really credible, which is why the narrative has become definitive, right? So think about it. How often does true crime ever believe the same thing about anything? Think about Depp versus Heard. Okay, there was that where everyone agreed with the same thing about Depp versus Heard, but before that views were incredibly divergent. Think of even the Chris Watts case, which you think is quite straightforward. There was like a diversity of views. Even with the Suzanne Morphew case, there were people who weren't like 100% convinced either way of a certain outcome, right? It's very, very rare that you have almost as 100% consensus in true crime. You know, there's often someone who says, for example, the Caitlin Armstrong case, there are people who are saying um, that there could be a sort of an intruder scenario there, that someone burgled Colin Strickland's home, and it's not necessarily Caitlin Armstrong that's involved there, right? In other words, there's not like 100% consensus. There's like there's this group that think there's another possible explanation there. You kind of often have that in true crime. And there are a lot of cases where it's split much, much worse. Like think about John Benet Ramsey, think about Madeleine McCann, think about even to some extent Casey Anthony. There's some people who think Kylie May, sorry, Kaylee Anthony may well have drowned. You know, it may be something like that. Thanks a lot, Frisco Chick. Appreciate it. Terry Dean says AWP's own words are that they are only concerned about where and not the how. Yeah, they have kind of said we are trying to find where something happens, not how something happens. So it is quite, in a way, you could say, a breakthrough for them that they come into this case and they figure out how, kind of like that. And true crime agrees with them. Mainstream media seems to agree with them. And I don't know whether law enforcement does. It's hard to say because you don't really hear much from them. So do you guys agree? In a way, you could say AWP can be credited for bringing the true crime community together in ways we've almost never seen before. Do you guys agree with that? Like they would go on one channel after another, and it was almost like one big happy family. I think not right now, but tonight or today, they're going on to the interview room. If you think about it, they've gone on pretty much every true crime channel, and it's sort of been like a one-stop, like hi, go on that channel, hi, go on that channel, and it's been like a great arrangement. Each true crime channel has done very well. They've gotten to know other people. They've sent their subscribers to AWP, and AWP, I think, have benefited. And it's just been one really good arrangement, right? Terry Hopkins, thanks for that. Okay, so this is the part I find a little bit strange, right? Having said all that, it's like such a good arrangement. I mean, everyone should be really happy. Everyone should be, like the true crime community and the creators should be happy. Like this has been a really interesting case. We've really gotten to know another creator, and it's been exciting and it's been interesting, and our subscribers have been very, interested. It's been a very compelling case, right? And you would think that AWP as well would say this is the best outcome. We've been embraced by the true crime community, right? So if you think about it like that, you'd think that they'd be luxuriating in their success. But then about a day ago, one of the folks from the channel went on to a relatively obscure true crime channel. I'm sorry, to my shame, I didn't really know about it. I didn't know that it's true crime. I don't still know if it's true crime, but it's a channel that they went on to, and he said, if you want to criticize us, be prepared to have the world come down on you, right? And I think I've put the link to that interaction in the description, and it's around about where you hear it. But if you think about that, what do you think about that? I don't know if I've ever said that. I don't know if I've ever said, if you criticize me or my book or what I think about that, I don't know if I've ever said that. It's quite a big statement. If you want to criticize us, be prepared to have the world come down on you. What do you think that means? What do you think that means? What I think that means is we've got a lot of supporters, and they're not going to like it if you disagree with us. That's what I think it means. And that's fair and that's fine. And I think it's true as well that they do have a big support base. But how does that help this? How does that help critical thinking? So can you not question? Can you not evaluate things? Can you not analyze? Can you not clarify? I think he did say, in fairness, I think he did say something like, if you criticize in a reasonable way, then that's fine. Well, then that's fine. But it is quite a harsh thing to say, you're going to see the world come down on you. I mean, who decides whether your critical thinking is okay? That's why I'm asking the question, is the definitive narrative being, what's the word, created? Is it naturally evolving and coming about? Or is it being dictated, right? Is it being kind of controlled? Is it kind of being, in other words, is it coming about in a natural way, or is it coming about in a kind of unnatural way? I'm talking about in true crime, the way true crime cases normally evolve. In a lot of true crime cases, a definitive narrator just kind of, what's the word? A definitive narrator not manifest, but he sort of becomes obvious. A good example is the interview room with the Summer Wells case. To be honest, I thought there was a moment right in the beginning where I thought I was actually, in a way, leading the thinking and to some extent. I'm talking about the very, very beginning of the Summer Wells case. I actually thought I was doing some really good work. And then the interview room came, and they went to Tennessee and spoke to Candace and spoke to Don, and went to the swimming hole and went to Chalet Wells and all that kind of thing. And of course, as soon as that happened, that first-hand knowledge totally trumped anything I could find from far away, going on Google. And I mean, I did in this in a similar way that we try to do in the Kiely Rodni case, where there was actually somebody who went there. Terry Dean went there, took photos, kind of was an investigator for True Crime Rocket Science, and she did some incredible work. We found out just how steep the slope of the reservoir was. We found out that the party wasn't at the Prosser campground, it was at the sanctuary. All sorts of things like that, other things as well. But it's not quite the same as you, the creator, being there like AWP were, on the ground, involved, and in the thick of things, right? I'm just saying, in the Summer Wells case, the interview room went there, and that is how they were able to really become the absolute authority on the Summer Wells case, right? They all of the best material is stuff that they got, speaking to Macbeth, speaking to Macbeth's mother, all of that, actually going into Chalet Wells. You can't beat that kind of first-hand experience. Robert says, I like the fake pic of the earth in the background. So if you think about Adventures with Purpose, why would anyone criticize them? And wouldn't breaking ranks with such a big channel just be a bad move? Like, wouldn't it just be dumb to criticize them willy-nilly? Why would you want to do that? So I do wonder, when he said, if you want to criticize us, be prepared to have the world come down on you. I did think, who are you thinking about when you say that? Like, are you thinking about someone specific? Are you thinking about something specific? Is it just a general, guys just don't, because this case has been quite weird. And it made me wonder whether, because the timing of it was quite interesting. Rebecca Rosenberg, she's a senior reporter from Fox News. It was like the day that he said that was also the day that an article came out on Fox News. I think you may have heard about it, that basically dealt with the kind of, it was like a review of the Kiely Rodni case, covering pretty much everything that we have seen, but then there was a sort of an addendum at the bottom. And one of the things in that addendum was like, there were various headings like accident or foul play and this and that. But right near the bottom, there was a addendum criticism. And it just made me wonder, is that what was is that the reason why you would say, if you want to criticize us, be prepared? Was it because of the article, or was it because of someone might refer to the article? And I must say, I looked at that. I saw the article, and I just wondered if you followed how everything that made the news was taken, and when I say news, I kind of mean that in quite a broad way. Everything that sort of made the news or sort of came onto the social media radar. Bear in mind, for some content creators who are doing 5-hour lives or 10-hour lives, it's like any information you can get, you want to talk about. And so I was just curious, are you going to talk about this? And so I was actually, what I thought I was going to do is I thought I was going to cover it. In other words, I thought, well, this is a different take. I think I'm going to cover it. And then I thought, hang on, I actually think I'm going to do this differently. I think I'm not going to cover it. And then I'm going to see who does cover it. And in particular, if you've been a guest on that channel, are they going to cover this particular story? And what happened was nobody covered it. No one. So I think I mentioned 20 channels that were pushing the foul play thing. Not one of those channels, certainly from what I could see. I also asked my patrons, I asked my supporters, I just said, if you are watching YouTube, if you come across someone referring to this article, will you let me know? And from what I saw and from what they saw, literally nobody saw that. Maybe we missed something. There was one channel that did cover it, but it's not a channel that I think's pushing the foul play thing. And AWP weren't a guest on that person's channel. Thanks a lot, Roses Are Red. Appreciate it. Terry says it was so genuine and powerful, a very moving experience. You see, there, Terry's talking about actually going there in person suddenly becomes real. It suddenly becomes, in a weird way, you've been watching this on YouTube, and now when you're there, it's that definitiveness reaches a whole another level. It's like, well, I'm actually here, and these are real people, and there's all this chatter going on, but here I am, right next to the real lake, right next to the real people. Who can really speak better than reality here? Who knows absolutely what the reality is, right? Okay, just looking at some of your comments. So again, as I say, the timing of this comment about, where he says, if you want to criticize us, be prepared to have the world come down on you. Like I said, I thought the timing was quite interesting. It was the same day that an article appeared on Fox News that seemed to interrupt Adventures with Purpose's heroic fairy tale. It really had been that. Everyone was saying nice things about them. Everyone was saying kind of good things about them. And like I said, I was wondering, is true crime going to pay attention to this article? And in a way, it didn't make sense for creators to do so, because isn't that going to be, killing the goose that's laying the golden egg kind of thing? Is it going to be good to do that? But as I said, I did find a channel that did review the article. I think I found another one, a very small channel, like a micro channel. I don't know if they reviewed the article, but I know I could kind of tell that they were being quite critical. But it's quite hard to say, are you being critical to stir the pot and just like be a lightning rod? It's like, well, someone is criticizing AWP, and now a lot of people are supposed to come and be indignant, or that didn't really happen. So I'd actually like to provide a link to that, but I wouldn't want the world to come down on them. I wouldn't want to be responsible for that. I don't know if that would happen, but certainly wouldn't want to be responsible if that did happen. But I do want to venture where angels fear to tread, not so much in the Fox News article criticizing AWP, but in how the article reveals AWP's backstory. That to me is quite interesting. That was news to me. And I think it colors in these characters that have come into the Kiely Rodni case quite well, in a really interesting way. Who are they? What are they? What were they doing before they were AWP, right? So this is an excerpt from the Fox News article. I'm not sure if this is quite what I want to get into here. Let's just have a look. But basically, can you guys read that? So this is an excerpt from the article where Doug Bishop says to Fox News, law enforcement missed Kiely, that they didn't find Kiely because of their lack of expertise and communication, right? It's because of their lack of expertise and our expertise that we found her and they didn't, right? It's quite interesting that he also uses the word communication. I'm not quite sure. Maybe he means that law enforcement didn't communicate properly amongst themselves. Could be that as well. Anyway, it goes on to say that they've solved 24 cold cases, and then he says, no matter where we solve a case, it creates drama, controversy, and embarrassment, right? So can you see there, he emphasizes lack of expertise and communication. That's the reason why law enforcement failed. That's from the article. Then he says, this is also from the article, that he attributes their own success to constant field experience. He's saying, you know what, we are diving all the time. And I mean, I think they went from that case to the Yolissa Fuentes case. Am I saying it right? So they went like from one dive to another dive. And so they are getting like constant field experience, what seems like they are. And if you think about Placer County or even Nevada, how often are they investigating cases where they've got to dive, right? And so the kind of a big difference between these agencies and AWP is AWP dive, whereas these agencies, there's a dive here and a dive there, you know, and they just don't kind of get into a rhythm, and that they don't get the hang of it, I guess. I do think he has a point where, I mean, when you see him, even when he's in the video, when you see him seeing the vehicle, he's not even sure. In the beginning, he thinks, is this a boat? You know what? I don't think it's the vehicle because it's got buildup on it. And then in other words, he kind of second guesses himself. And then he kind of backtracks and he says, you know what? This is a really peculiar signal. That looks like a tire. And of course it is. I'm just saying, with all that experience, he was even to some, because it's very fuzzy. That sonar sort of, it's like what's the word? Yeah, it's kind of like a mixed, murky, fuzzy signal. And so you've kind of got to go over it a few times to get a sense of what's under that fuzziness. Does that make sense? And to his credit, he sees something fuzzy and recognizes that it's weird, and it was something. Where someone else may have seen the same fuzziness and just said, I don't know, not sure what it is, and kind of moved on, right? Anyways, attributing that to constant field experience, which I think is true. I think it is a factor. Then there's another page from that article. And this is where you kind of get to know these guys, the Adventures with Purpose guys. I didn't know some of this stuff. Those of you who have been with their channels for a long time may have known. I don't know. But it says here, the company founded by Jared Lysek, a diver whose initial objective was to clean up the marine environment by using abandoned cars from waterways. So that is what Jared was doing before he did Adventures with Purpose. His job was, or what he was doing was cleaning up the marine environment, right? It's not a very thorough backstory. I've seen more information about Jared and sort of marketing related stuff. But to me, the bottom line is, before he started Adventures with Purpose, he seems like a guy who cares about the marine environment. Like, he seems almost like an environmentalist. I mean, he could probably say better what he cares about. But what I want to be clear about is I don't get the sense that he was in true crime, or he was a cop, or that he was in that sort of area um, before he became a diver. Um, Now, if you think about critical thinking, and you think about when you're cleaning up the marine environment, aren't you using critical thinking? I think you kind of are. I think you kind of are thinking, okay, well, that's damaging the marine environment. In other words, you're seeing, you've got to kind of think critically to say that's damaging the environment. That's, you get what I'm saying. Anyone who's an environmentalist is going to be looking at an environment going, that's not good for it, and let's do something about that. And to some extent, that may apply to true crime. Now, in my case, before I got into true crime, I was investigative reporter. I was writing articles for financial magazines. I was writing travel articles. Um, uh, yeah, what else? Fitness as well. And so I kind of had to think critically in order to create content that magazines would want. But I was interviewing people, I was investigating certain aspects, such as the barefoot revolution. What's the other thing? Um, the the diet where you don't have any carbs, that whole thing. I interviewed people like Gary Torbs and really well-known um, sort of world famous scientists like Professor Tim Noakes as well. But what I'm trying to say is that investigative background feeds into true crime, right? And so you just want to ask the question in a general sense, could that have been the case with AWP as well? Did they have something that they did before they become AWP that helped them become world-class divers, right? So in terms of um, in terms of Nick Rinn, let me just don't quite know why that's there. Just do this. So in terms of Nick Rinn, he was a scuba instructor. He was the guy obviously who found Kiely's car, but it says that he teamed up with Doug in 2019. And at the time, Doug had a tow truck company, and then they filmed their efforts and so on. This is where I think I am a little bit critical, where I would say, if you're going to talk about, you must have experience and expertise. Where's that other one? You need expertise and you need experience. Well, if Nick only teamed up with Doug in 2019, then hasn't he only been at this for 3 years? So in other words, hasn't he only really been with AWP for 3 years? And you could maybe argue, yeah, well, he's dived a lot in 3 years. They've solved 24 cases in 3 years, whatever it is. That's definitely a good argument. But 3 years is a kind of a short time, especially if you take into account that the pandemic happened from 2020, 2021. And I think the pandemic did have an impact on businesses. I don't know whether that had impact on AWP. You guys might know better than I do. I'm just saying, I started writing books, true crime books, in 2014. I'm approaching 10 years of experience that I've got in true crime, right? So if Nick was diving since 2019, he's got maybe 3 years experience. Did he know for a fact that when he's seeing foul play, is that based on experience, or is that based on what he saw? What is it based on? I'm asking a question. I don't know what the answer is. Nick could probably tell you. Nick could probably say, you know what, wasn't Nick, he was in the military as well. So it could have some link to that as well. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing. Yeah, so the last thing I kind of want to say on this is, again, it's this question, the narrative in this case, has it been evolving in, the definitive narrative, has it been evolving in a way naturally, or has it been kind of purposefully put there? Has it been purposefully and strategically shaped? And think about that the way someone who's in marketing or advertising, or someone, who's trying to steer your thinking in a particular direction. Do you get what I'm saying? So if you think about either the definitive narrative is coming about all on its own, or you could say it actually is being sort of dictated, right? And if you think about what has been coming across really, really consistently in the mainstream media, is this thing of diver suspects foul play, diver suspects foul play. It's incredibly, an incredibly concise message that's repeated over and over and over again. You know what I mean? It's a very consistent message. And if you think about the branding of Adventures with Purpose, also very strong and very consistent. That's very important. It's important to brand yourself and communicate effectively. The only question is, okay, so that communication is effective, it is consistent, that's good. But is it true? Does it stand the test of critical thinking? Is it, if you evaluate it, is it up to snuff? If you question it, does it hold up, right? Okay, I'm almost done. So something that I thought was interesting on this question is, if you say, is someone dictating the narrative? Well, it could actually be tow truck guy, right? Tow truck guy could actually be dictating the narrative in this case. The guy who can't remember whether he saw whatever happened on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, right? Think about it. Who's dictating this case? Well, it could be tow truck guy, right? And it's like not me who's saying this, right? I don't really feel that tow truck guy should be really influencing this case personally, but he is. And Doug went onto a channel and he said, he's now becoming our story and it's going to dictate what we do. We had no reason not to trust him, right? That was said on a channel. I'm going to just put those words here. So Doug was actually saying, we're going to kind of allow tow truck guy to dictate what we do. And I think he was saying that's going to be our story. And I thought it was fascinating that he actually used the word dictate. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, that he actually said, what did he say? It's going to dictate what we do. I just thought that was quite an interesting word to use. So if you guys are interested in listening to that, I'm sure a lot of you would have anyway. I'm sure a lot of you have been doing the rounds on YouTube. But if you haven't gone to the description and you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can listen to what Doug says here. It was fairly recent. I think it was, I provided the right link. It was on the 14th of September. So I think the same day that this article from Fox News came out, right? Maharaja says, you have more faith than I do. It's been kind of ridiculous, not necessarily Ali's fault, but small town funding, I'm sure they mean well. We're not there yet. Roses are red says tow truck guy is probably mixed up. That's really quite funny. David Bebb says Doug is a tow truck guy too. Yeah. Rod in Deep says the question was she driving dictates the direction of this case. That's an interesting comment, definitely. Holly says, how do we know what Nick really saw? Holly, I think you can see what the camera shows and you can hear what he's saying. To me, it is pretty self-explanatory. I do think Nick was being sincere. But I don't know if you guys saw, I did put up a video. How did it go? Something like, do Adventures with Purpose still think it's suspicious? Right? And I think that's quite an interesting question. I think that's quite an interesting question. And it's not necessarily this person. Do you still think it's suspicious? It's maybe that person, Anyway, so I hope you found this interesting. I think being a little bit of a different way of looking at this whole case, quite a global sort of view of the case. And I'm now going to go into a little bit of a different area, still Kiely Rodni, but I want to talk about the toxicology. How many of you here watched my previous video on the toxicology? Have you guys seen the video I did on the toxicology? Because a couple of you asked me, how on earth do you know, or do you think you know, that the toxicology is completed? So Zircon said, not yet. Pauline says, yes. Elina says, love this live. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Sue says we should do a survey on homicide or accident. We can in a moment. Ciara says, I was until I saw you live. Okay. So I want to bring something up. Let me just, by the way, in terms of this quote, I often think in true crime that each true crime channel feels like, you know what, I'm the voice for the victim. I'm speaking on behalf of the dead person. And I often wonder, would that person agree? Maybe you mean well, maybe you're really sincere, but are you really speaking on behalf of that person? Can you really claim to know the interiority and know in fine detail what they experienced? Because I would say you need humility to do that. You need to be sensitive and kind of inward looking, and you've got to be patient to try and get to know this person. You can't just snap your fingers and say, I've seen a picture of Kiely Rodni. I know when she was born. I know what school she went to. I know who she is. It takes a really long, just as it takes a long time to meet any person and get to know who they are. In true crime, you've got to do the same thing. And so, I think one's got to be very careful when you say you are, being the voice for a victim. In order to do that, you've got to be really, really humble. Do you guys agree with that? You've got to be very in like a listening mode, not in a telling mode, not in a lecturing mode, in a sort of absorption mode. And it's critical thinking, but it's more than that. It's putting your feet into their shoes and for an extended period. And how many people are prepared to do that? Thanks a lot, Jennifer. So that is something I do try to do, is I take it from two areas. The one is the circumstances they were in. So all the dynamics, and what was the money narrative, and what was the stress narrative, and what are the family dynamics, and what are the relationship dynamics. That's the one. But the other one is, who does she say she is? And you've got to step out of yourself and say, who was this person who was 16 years old? Not from the perspective of I am who I am and that's what I think. What were you like when you were 16 years old? Right? And I often see in true crime a real failure of the imagination. Do you guys agree with that? It's like, think a bit further, think a bit deeper. Okay, I want to get out of this kind of slideshow thing. How do I think if I do that and then go there? So I'm going to bring up myself, but I just want to bring up these. So this came out today, by the way, about the date on that flyer. That's why I say the mainstream media is way behind. It's definitely not dictating the narrative. But anyway, what you see here is actually from the previous video I put up. This is the toxicology report of Shanann Watts. And unfortunately, the date is a bit corrupted here by when I screen grabbed it. But if you look carefully, it's the 29th of August 2018. That's when the toxicology was completed. Let me bring that up like that, like so. Right? So, in other words, in the Chris Watts case, the toxicology came out for Shanann Watts as early as within 2 weeks. Remember, Shanann was killed on the 13th, but I think she was found on the 16th or so, somewhere around there. And so between the 16th and the 29th is like 13 days. So it effectively took 2 weeks to complete the toxicology for Shanann Watts, right? So I'm trying to address this question of how do you know, or why do you think that the toxicology is complete in the Kiely Rodni case? Well, here's a reference case where toxicology was done. One of the things they were looking for was alcohol in Shanann's system. And the date of the toxicology here is the 29th of August. So it was completed within 2 weeks. That's quite short. But that's not the end of the question, because there were also the kids, Bella and Cece. And what is different with Bella and Cece? They were submerged in, I hate to say it, but Shanann was buried in sand. So the toxicology was a lot simpler. The children, as horrible as the sounds, were put into tanks, right? And the chemicals in those tanks interfered with what would have been otherwise fairly straightforward toxicology. In other words, the toxicology with Shanann was so straightforward, it took 2 weeks. right? And so when you look at the toxicology report for Bella and Cece, you see that it doesn't come out the same day. Why? Because it's more complicated. Because these computers are running the data. That's as simple as what it is. It's not a conspiracy. It's not law enforcement covering something up. It's not anything besides the data processes take longer because it's more complicated. It's as simple as that. So this is the toxicology for Bella Watch. You can see that came out on the 12th of September, right? That is when the toxicology report was issued. Let me bring that up. So what that tells you is that in Bella Watts's case, the toxicology, which you can imagine was quite complicated because it's not even water, it's chemicals, right? Sort of abrasive, corrosive is really the right word. Corrosive chemicals are going to be much harder to sort of deal with than not, right? But this report was nevertheless issued on the 12th of September. So less than a month later, the girls were recovered from those oil tanks on, I think, the 17th of August. By the 12th of the next month, their toxicology was done. So in other words, it took around about 4 weeks, right? And I think have I got CC's here as well? Not sure. I don't have CC's here, but CC's toxicology is, I think, 5 days after this. I think it's like the 17th of September. So hers may have taken closer to 5 weeks, right? Sorry, not 5 weeks, also 4 weeks because it was 17th to the 17th. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is to say here's a reference case. Besides the Anne Hesh case, there's a reference case that shows you can have your toxicology ready in 4 weeks. Now, you could definitely make the argument that the girls were in oil for 2 or 3 days, and Kiely was in water for 16 days. That's a big difference. I would argue that being in oil for 3 days, it's a very corrosive environment, is almost the equivalent of 2 weeks in fresh water. I would, it's not a scientific argument, it's just my view. I'm just saying it's a similar broad calculus. But the basic argument I'm trying to make is that it probably would take 4 weeks minimum for the toxicology to be ready. Guess what? We reached the 4-week mark today. It is 4 weeks ago today that Kiely was, today's Saturday, so maybe tomorrow it'll be 4 weeks. Tomorrow is the 18th of September. Kiely was taken out the reservoir on the 21st of August. So we're almost at month on month. So it's about 4 weeks that they've had to do the toxicology. That's the first point. The other point is law enforcement made a rare comment to the news, to News Nation, where they basically said, we are going to give you guys an update next week. And they said that last week, Wednesday. Now, what I think that means is if they knew on Wednesday that they would be in a position to give an update next week, and this is an assumption, I could be wrong, I think that means that they had reason to expect the toxicology report by the end of the week now that's just ended. And with that toxicology report in hand, they would then be able to integrate that to their final report, which they can then hand in or deliver on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or something like that. That's how I read it. Now, I could be wrong, but can you see how that it makes sense? That it, just in terms of other cases and in terms of what we know they've said, it's not just it's not just thinking, okay, another case. It's actually looking at what law enforcement have just said. Now, you could also argue that update could be anything. You could say they might be going to say something about her phone. They might be going to say something about the laptop. They might be going to say something about something else. But the timing of it, where we are now, 4 weeks later, there's been like 4 weeks of silence. And what they said earlier on was they said, we're not going to say anything until the autopsy and toxicology is complete. Well, they've now just said, we are going to say something, we are going to give you an update next week. Well, isn't that because the toxicology is complete? Tell me I'm not thinking in a kind of a rational step-by-step way. It doesn't mean I'm right, just that it's kind of logical, right? Do you agree that it's kind of it's a logical possibility? Sue says Kylie seemed like a sensible young lady. I think that's true of, anyone can be sensible until you are intoxicated. Like, as soon as you're intoxicated, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are or sensible you are, that doesn't really count anymore. I actually saw a video today of, I don't know quite know how to say her name, Cara Delevingne. I think I think she was friends with Amber Heard at some point, but I don't know if you guys have seen it. She's walking around really erratically, really, really erratically, and you can just imagine if she had to get into a vehicle, you can just see there's no way she would get like 100 meters without crashing because she can barely walk. Did you guys see that? Yeah, Cara Delevingne. Yeah. If you haven't seen that video, just Google Cara Delevingne and concerned viewers or something, but you should see it. And look at that video and imagine if you got into a vehicle, how far do you think she would get? And the thing is, when someone's in a state like that, you can't really reason with them because they are totally irrational. They are gone. They're not there. The lights are on, but nobody's home, kind of thing, right? Uh, okay. I think I'm about ready to wrap up, guys. Are there any questions? So I want to talk a little bit about something that really moved me this weekend. So I'm kind of moving away now from the Kiely Rodni case. I want to recommend, especially to my patrons on True Crime Rocket Science, and subscribers and members. It's something I want to kind of deal with sort of separately to the Kiely Rodni case. The weird thing is it's also about divers, like quite strange. It's a true story about a French woman who dived. This happened in 2002. It's a true story. And a movie's just come out on Netflix called No Limit. And that's a movie based on a true story. And it's really the story about a man and a woman who are both world champion divers. And then something really horrible takes place. And it actually ends up becoming like a true crime story. The crazy thing as well is it an accident or foul play, right? Is it an accident or foul play? Someone dies in a really horrible, troubling way. And is it somebody else's fault, right? This is also a true story, but based on the sort of diving thing. Let me bring up the the Netflix thing. It's on Netflix. It's called No Limit. It's actually dubbed from French. And this is a case I really want to cover. If you guys have watched the movie The Big Blue, it came out quite a long time ago. This reminds one a lot of The Big Blue, definitely. Not there yet. Thanks a lot, not there yet. So let me know in the comments, especially if you're watching this in replay. Let me know in the comments, first of all, if you've seen the movie. And there's also another documentary dealing with the exact same subject matter. And let me know if you guys want me to do a sort of a, excuse the pun, a deep dive on this particular case. It's fascinating, it's scary, it's terrifying. It's also so tragic and so troubling. It's kind of a alternate reality Kiely Rodni case. It's not somebody driving. It's also an underwater scenario. It's beautiful and it's devastating. It's also, yeah, I don't want to give you, I don't want to spoil what happens in it. But let me know, especially those who are watching this on replay, go and, if you've got Netflix, go and watch it. And then I will talk to you guys about possibly doing my own deep dive on this particular case on this channel. It's really a fascinating subject, and I think one that will be worth kind of exploring. Yeah, it is definitely claustrophobic. Sounds good. Okay. Just want to see if I've got another image dealing with that. I don't think I've got another one. Well, I think that's enough anyway. Oh, by the way, there is the toxicology for Celeste Watts. So there you can actually see that one came out. I think I actually have it. So that came out the 7th of September, and Bella's came out the 12th. So Cece's actually came out after about 3 weeks, and Bella's came out after about 4 weeks. So all three of those toxicology came out at different intervals. Shanann's after 2 weeks, Cece's after 3 weeks, and Bella's after 4 weeks. The other thing that's quite interesting with the toxicology with Shanann Watts is even though they completed the toxicology, they kind of shut everything down and they went and investigated whether Shanann had any alcohol to drink, because I think they were worried that there could be a potential legal argument in that area, and they wanted to shut that down. They wanted to make sure that there was no way Shanann had consumed alcohol, and they did. So that's definitely quite interesting. Okay, Sue, we can do it right now. Sue wants to do a survey. How many of you think that what happened to Kiely was an accident? How many of you think it was foul play? So if you think it was an accident, put the letter A. If you think it was foul play, put FP. Let me say that again. We're going to do a quick survey right now. How many of you think it was an accident? If you think it's an accident, put an A. If you think it's foul play, put FP. Well, 3 A's in a row. I see one foul play so far. Holly says, I respect you, but foul play. Okay. So yeah, there's quite a unanimous audience here that says accident. Quite interesting. So I wonder whether you could say I've influenced. I certainly don't think I've influenced the narrative much, but I do think I've perhaps influenced my some of my channel. I think that's maybe um, true. Rod says driving accident, not driving foul play. Okay. Uh, Gebel there Bell. Don't know how to say that. Says alcohol plus accident. So the bizarre thing with Anne Hesh is that the one thing they didn't find in a toxicology was alcohol. They found cocaine, they found fentanyl. They don't know whether fentanyl is absolutely relevant, but they didn't find any alcohol. It'll be interesting to see whether they find alcohol and other substances. I think the difficulty with all of this is the sort of the polysubstance, the sort of polypharmacy scenario going on. It's not just how these substances interact with one another, it's how they interact with the alcohol that builds up in the body post mortem, plus there's the water factor. All of that makes it complicated to come up with very accurate data. Complicated, but not impossible. Complicated just means it takes longer. That is why I think it has taken longer. But I do think we are going to see. Um, I think there's going to be an announcement from law enforcement tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday. Let's see if I'm right on that score. Are there any further questions? Terry says, do you think law enforcement might hesitate to collaborate with AWP in the future, not wanting the circus? I think that they, if it's a diving type situation, I think they will be grateful to have them, but I think a there might be a stronger focus on um, don't make certain statements to the media. I don't know. You see, the problem is they're a social media platform. How on earth do you control that part of it? Um, Law enforcement might feel the most important thing is we want to find this person. The social media stuff, we don't really care about. It's not ideal, and maybe it doesn't make us look good, but you kind of roll with the punches. That might be how they see it. Fairness is fentanyl is very important. It makes people do crazy things. Yeah. Rod, I think what could happen here, in the Kiely Rodni case, what could happen here is, can you imagine if, and it's just hypothetical, I'm just saying, like, what if you think about everything, if you think that there's been the mainstream media narrative has been of late, Diver suspects foul play, Diver suspects foul play, it reeks of foul play. That's the mainstream media narrative. The social media narrative has also been foul play, foul play, foul play, not so much on my channel, but on most of the channels. Can you imagine if law enforcement come out with a report, and the report is that it was an accident, right? Now you might say that's not going to mean anything. That's going to mean law enforcement aren't credible. And that's a fair argument. But the other side is if they can show data that the vehicle, um, the speed, the time that it went into the reservoir, let's say it went in at let's just say for argument's sake that it went into the water at say 12:34 or 12:37 or something like that, that would tend to make you think, well, the vehicle didn't go anywhere else, right? Um, if Kylie's phone is actually found, for example, in a jeans pocket, that would also be like, wow, if there was foul play, you would imagine someone who would have taken her phone. Things like that could definitely shift the narrative. So it's possible that Adventures with Purpose themselves may feel, okay, next time we're not going to kind of stick our neck out. We are going to just stick to diving. On the other hand, they may say, we speculated, we didn't say we were 100% right. We weren't telling everyone we were right. And, um, you know, we didn't have to be right. I think an argument could be made that this is the way true crime is going. I call it, if true crime does go in that direction, then I tend to think of it as social media. In other words, where you don't really care if it's true or not. You care if it's popular and you care if it's going to make money, but it can become like disinformation. But the point is that formula works in true crime. You are going to grow your subscribers. It is more interesting. It is going to draw a crowd. Does it really matter if it's not true? That's the part that kind of worries me, though. Like, I like to believe that I'm sincere about true crime and, that it's true, that it's authentic. And if, for example, the accident narrative is not very popular, but I believe it's true, the accident narrative isn't as exciting and titillating, but that shouldn't be why you take a particular direction. And it is kind of worrying me that the witch hunts are done because people like to go on witch hunts. They don't like to think critically. Um, but it's kind of up to you guys, and there are only 200 people in chat right now, but it's up to you guys if certain channels are taking those sort of liberties and you let them. It's really up to you guys to give them the pass and enjoy that stuff. Yeah, reality is often boring. Yeah. Okay, so that is it from my side. Bear in mind, half an hour from now, AWP are going to be on the interview room. He's an ex-cop, so it'll be interesting to hear what that conversation is. Is he going to ask the simple question, do you still think it's suspicious? And also, um, has your thinking about this changed at all? Or are you as certain today as you were on day one, right? It'll be interesting to see whether that comes up. It'll also be interesting to see what he thinks about should a diving team solve true crime cases, and are they qualified to do that? Can you say after the Kiely Rodni case that they have shown that they're qualified to do that? What does another law enforcement dude think? Now, what's quite interesting is I found one channel, one biggish channel that had AWP on that didn't support the foul play thing, and that was Profiling Evil. Profiling Evil said, I think this is an accident. and he's ex-law enforcement. So that's quite interesting. Wow, Rod says, I can see it being an accident because I put my own truck in that very reservoir, in that very spot. But if she wasn't driving, I can also see foul play. I don't see 300 people covering up for, it's not 300 people from one school. It's 300 people from all over. I don't see 300 people covering up for somebody where a third of them or half of them didn't know someone else. Just don't see that happening. Calgirl says some of us are open-minded and do not follow the crowd. Okay, 2 hours. It's a bit longer than I thought it would be, but I hope you guys enjoyed this. But think about this as we go forward. Where's the definitive narrative coming from? And is that definitive narrative being dictated, or is it being allowed to just come about on its own? What do you guys think? So I'm going to leave that with you. Thanks a lot, Mod, Bria in France. You must sleep well. Sky as well. Terry, thanks a lot for being here. Sharon as well. Members, subs, and so on. Thanks very much. Thanks for the super chats as well. If you're watching this on replay, remember to let me know about the no limit thing if you want me to do that, and also make sure you go and watch it. Go and watch it on Netflix, because it's going to be really interesting to talk about it if you've seen the movie, because there's a movie and there's a documentary. So bear that in mind. And then that's it from me. If you're watching this on replay, if you've enjoyed this content, remember you can hit the thanks button. Okay. Have a great rest of your weekend. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Terry.